Now, over the last few weeks, as the Ahsoka series has gone on, I've heard a lot of fans saying that the show is saving Star Wars, that it's so good that it is perhaps reinvigorated their love for the franchise, or is instilling faith for them in Lucasfilm or Disney, or at least in Dave Filoni, that they have things on the right track now and that hopefully it's a trend that will continue. And though I'm happy that so many fans are apparently enjoying it, and I'm one of those fans that by and large has enjoyed the show, and that I also obviously hope things do indeed get better and better for Star Wars going forward. There's a few things I want to see more than Star Wars get better and to thrive. But these takes that Ahsoka is saving Star Wars are of course very subjective in nature. They're primarily rooted in one's own personal enjoyment of the show, and ignore any and all numbers we have in regards to it. And thus far, what the numbers do say, keeping in mind that Disney doesn't exactly release internal numbers other than their bold claim a few weeks ago that 14 million people watched the premiere episode of Ahsoka. But anyway, from the data we do have, which mainly comes from the Nielsen ratings, we learned that the debut 2 episodes, which of course were released at the same time, they only beat out Andor among all their Star Wars shows or seasons in terms of viewership, and views are calculated by taking total minutes watched from Nielsen and dividing that by the length of the episode or episodes to get a very, very rough approximation of just how many people watched it. And so, looking at the numbers, not only does it seem that, thus far anyway, things could certainly still change for the series, but not only does it seem that thus far very few people are watching Ahsoka, relatively speaking of course, but overall there has been a more or less sort of downward trend when it comes to viewership of Star Wars shows on Disney Plus in general, other than with The Mandalorian Season 3, which is an anomaly we'll discuss a bit more later. In other words, if you're Disney, you're no doubt happy that fan reaction to the series seems to be rather positive, but you're not all that happy that the numbers aren't there for it. Not when the game plan for Star Wars has no doubt always been since the day they purchased it, to steadily increase viewership or consumption across all mediums, that you want to see those numbers steadily improving over time, which of course indicates a growing interest in Star Wars in general, that you're both keeping the fans you currently have happy and generating brand new ones along the way. To put it very simply, Disney purchased Lucasfilm to create more Star Wars content than ever before in the hopes of creating more fans than ever before in order to make more money than ever before off of it. Not that it hadn't done well under George Lucas, with some estimates figuring he made, or grossed when all was said and done, that it made somewhere around $22 billion. But one could argue, though perhaps not rightfully so, as we'll soon discuss, but one could argue that number could have been much, much higher had George Lucas just made more Star Wars, right? I'd have to imagine Disney even looks at him and thinks, what a fool for not capitalizing on it even more, for only making 2 trilogies or 6 total films, not counting the Clone Wars movie or those Ewok movies, but only making 6 films in the 35 years he owned the franchise. I mean, in Disney's first 7 years alone of owning it, or over a 5-year stretch of time actually, they'd already cranked out 5 films, and since 2019 and the launch of Disney Plus, they've created 7 seasons of live-action shows. And if the sequels had been received better and hadn't seen a steady box office decline, I'd wager the movies wouldn't have stalled out for as long as they have, that we would have had at least another 2 by now, or since The Rise of Skywalker came out nearly 4 years ago. Though I do think in an odd sort of way the long gap between films we currently have, and that will go on for a while yet, keeping in mind we don't even know exactly when we'll get our next Star Wars movie. I mean, it is scheduled for May of 2026, but we'll see if they can actually hit that date, given the writer and actor strike, not to mention their general ineptitude on the filmmaking front lately. And there are rumors circulating that even more of their previously announced films have been cancelled, those being the James Mangold Dawn of the Jedi film, as well as the Taika Waititi film that was announced roughly 3 years ago, and that he is still writing. But anyway, this long gap may actually pay off for them, I think, because in a few more years, regardless of what people may have thought of the sequel trilogy, good or bad, there just might be some excitement around the idea of seeing Star Wars return to the theaters, watching it on the big screen after such a long hiatus. Especially when you realize that a lot of Star Wars fans aren't actually so much Star Wars fans. Now, what do I mean by that dumbass sounding and perhaps even gatekeeping sounding statement? Well, I'd say for the vast, vast majority of people out there who call themselves a Star Wars fan, most of them don't actually see Star Wars as anything more than some cool movies that, yes, they very much do love and enjoy, and get into when they come out, but not as something more than that. Not as this sort of living, breathing universe with all this amazing lore to explore that they want to continuously stay vested in. Simply put, they don't actually get into it the same way I, or almost certainly you watching this video now, do. It's not something akin to a hobby for them. Instead, it's something they enjoy watching every so often for whatever reason. Maybe it's for the cool action or the fun and entertaining stories, who knows? But it's not something they give any real thought to or want to truly invest time in beyond just watching the movies. And so for them, a movie coming out every 2 to 3 years, or a new trilogy starting after a decade of not being in the theaters, as far as they know anyway. As far as they're concerned, nothing new Star Wars has come out because they would never think of reading a book or watching a Star Wars cartoon. Those have to be for kids, right? But a movie every few years, they are absolutely there for it and excited. They're hooked by the flashy trailer, they're buying a shirt or some other merch in anticipation or after seeing it. And for the next 2 weeks after that, after the release, they may even go multiple times and they're the biggest Star Wars fan on the planet until they're not anymore, until those few weeks have gone by and the next big shiny thing in entertainment has stolen most, if not all, of their attention away. Because at the end of the day, they love the movies, yes, they love them, they are a fan, but they're not into Star Wars itself that much. And Disney putting out more and more content won't change that. George Lucas wasn't a fool, he likely understood that less was more with Star Wars. And inundating people with it would make it feel less and less special and less desirable to watch. He probably knew a constant stream of it would only see diminishing returns. That there is a finite amount of Star Wars most people, most fans want or are willing to go and see or seek out. I mean, it's one thing to go to a new Star Wars movie every 2 to 3 years, but it's something else to watch perhaps multiple films a year, or to watch a show on Disney Plus for 8 weeks in a row, when that just doesn't quite have the same look and feel to it as those movies do. It's not quite as awesome as they are. And then to only watch another one a few months after that, followed by yet another one a few months later. And this problem, if you want to call it that, is only going to be compounded if the content itself is not fantastic or top-notch pretty much each and every time. Your average person or fan isn't going to watch mediocre Star Wars on Disney Plus just because it's Star Wars. For most out there, they see Star Wars as something that should be special. That should be a big blockbuster theatrical event. Not a TV series that, if we're being honest here, doesn't have anywhere near the same production values as those films do, and tends to be just smaller in scope and scale in general. And sure, those fans were initially interested when Star Wars came to Disney Plus. Many people checked out The Mandalorian because they wanted to know what Star Wars could or would look like on television or on a streaming service. And a lot of people, yeah, they really loved the show. A lot of people really enjoyed the adventures of Din and Grogu, but the problem is that's all they enjoyed about it. They really liked those characters, but it didn't exactly make them fans of Star Wars itself. Because if it had actually made a large percentage of them Star Wars fans on the whole, I'd have to imagine that the Ahsoka series, featuring a character that, as far as some of them know, was introduced in The Mandalorian and that was then going to be attached to that show in some way, I would think the series would have much, much stronger premiere numbers, not numbers that are a mere 1/3 the viewership of Mando Season 3's premiere. And so, in a rather roundabout way, the point I'm trying to make here, not to be any sort of downer, but the point I'm trying to make is that no, Star Wars is not being saved by Ahsoka right now, not in any kind of objective way. Which isn't to say that there isn't anything to like about it, especially for the more hardcore fan, those who have maybe seen Rebels and Clone Wars and so on, or that it isn't a solid or enjoyable show. I'm by no means trying to dismiss your personal enjoyment of it, and every time I bring up numbers in a video, I will inevitably have people who respond by saying, I don't care what the numbers say, all I care about is if I enjoy it. Which, yeah, is fine. In the moment or while watching it, that is all you really should care about, whether or not you are liking it or not. But I really do have to wonder if this show is capturing the more casual fan, especially with those early numbers, which is not good for Star Wars long term, regardless of if you like it currently or not, or if this show is personally saving it for you or not. The few people I know are friends and family who are even watching it, and that number is down quite a bit from Mando Season 3, when pretty much everybody I knew at least started watching it, and then not everybody made it to the finish line. But most that I know watching it think it is kind of entertaining, if not quite a bit confusing. And the thing that Disney and Lucasfilm really don't seem to understand is that if the content is going to be constant, then it needs to constantly be great to get and keep people hooked. Which isn't to say every single show needs to be flawless, but you need far more solid hits than misses. And the fact that there are indeed those saying that this is saving Star Wars, that the Ahsoka series is saving Star Wars right now, well, that's a testament to the fact that they've been failing in that mission, that there's been far more misses than hits along the way, and each of those misses is no doubt another exit ramp for plenty of fans of all kinds. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about all this. Do you think Ahsoka is saving Star Wars right now? Or is it just a decent or pretty good or really good show that a lot of fans are enjoying that isn't maybe bringing in the casuals? Whatever you do think though, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.